Steve Moran here with another episode of Foresight TV. I was talking to my friend Bill Pettit, who is one of the most amazing leaders. I was talking to him about balancing, and I look at that, I'm not quite straight, so let me see if I can get that right. So, Bill, I'm just really excited to talk to you, to learn from you. But before we get started in our conversation, let me run this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Bill, welcome.
How are you?
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
I am doing good. I always sort of like to start out by saying that some people are really comfortable on live stream and some people don't like it very much. But the best way to think about it is you and I are just going to have a conversation and we're going to let the rest of the world listen in. And so it's no big deal.
That's great.
But let's actually start with a little bit of an introduction. I mean, you're well known in the industry, but sort of like to sort of review your history in the industry, and then we'll move on to what your next chapter is.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, I entered the industry in 1992 after a career in banking, and ironically, I found that my career in banking actually set me up, I think, for success, really, as we started building Merrill Gardens in 1992. Put the strategy together and then evolved it from one property up to what's now been over 100 properties with what Merrill Gardens has today, and what we have operated and owned, operated, and sold in the past. But over that period of time, I think one of the things that was impactful in my experience was the ability to work with seniors and to have this vision that if a senior wanted to migrate into Merrill Gardens, they should not have to make one change in terms of how they live their lives. And so it's a world without rules, if you want to think about it that way. And that's the way the residents of Merrill Gardens even today think about it. Now, COVID may have been an exception to that, but we started out with just building and developing a few properties, refined it, and then we went through acquisitions. We developed over $2 billion in real estate that we owned and operated. And I got a chance to work with some pretty incredible people, not only in Merrill Gardens, but also in the industry. And I was fortunate enough to serve a term as president of American Senior Housing Association. Also spent many years on the Argentum board. And those connections always were helpful to me, and I think to our team at Merrill Gardens, in terms of strategy, vision, and execution from that standpoint.
So you guys had a pretty unique business model where you would build up a portfolio, sell off some of your older assets, and then start building again. And that seemed to work really well for you. If we were to take a look at the earliest properties that you built and the most recent properties that you've built, what's evolved and what's gotten better?
That's a great question. So when we entered the industry, we were probably in the mainstream of looking at how to develop properties and operate properties in senior housing. A lot of our early developments were kind of migrated to what I would call less expensive sites on the edge of town. The typical 5 acres, 100, 125 or 50 units, and What happened during that period of time, and what's now evident in what Merrill Gardens develops today from that standpoint, is that we found that what we had created in that vision was essentially an island of old age. So, because we were on the edge, because we had 5 acres, our residents, all 80-year-olds and older, basically spent their days together. And we created activities for them to engage them in that context. But that was what the population was. And as we began to move people out of our properties to find what I call intergenerational experiences that expressed and was representative of the way they lived their life before they decided to consider Merrill Gardens, we were busing people to find that experience. And so one of the biggest things we changed in terms of development was looking and developing sites which were in the core of activity. We loved those sites with high walkability scores, where if a resident didn't like our coffee, they could walk outside a block and go find Starbucks if that's what they wanted. They were accustomed to having dinner out as independent senior living at home on a Thursday night. Then they could walk from the community and find a restaurant that they could still go out to dinner on Thursday nights. One of the things that hasn't changed, though, is when we started the company 30 years ago, we made a decision that we were going to build a residential building, one with unit sizes that replicated uh, nice apartments in that context, or condominiums, ones that had a kitchen, even though the resident didn't necessarily cook in their room. They always had the option to cook in their room. And so when they were moving from home to Merrill Gardens, it felt comfortable and it felt like home in that context. And so that's been a consistent element of what we have designed and built. It's also what we looked for in companies and portfolios and assets that we bought over the years as well. Some of the buildings that we sold over the course of the last 10 to 12 years were buildings that did not fit that model. And there weren't good choices between studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms in the building. But that was our guide. Now, I can take that whole vision and pivot in terms of what we have Tana doing today, and some of that design comes back in as we look for solutions to serve middle income seniors that can't afford what we build and operate today in a full service licensed environment.
Yeah, I would love to have you expand a little bit more on the middle market challenges and opportunities. I'm gonna sort of start by setting the stage a little bit in being honest that I tend to see the problem a little different than many people in the industry, in that I think that when you look at the middle market study, it actually showed there are a whole bunch of people in that middle market category who have housing of some type. And I think the second challenge, and I have very mixed feelings about this, is that I don't always get to live where I want to live. And meaning that I wouldn't expect you to, or the city of Beverly Hills, to go and make an affordable housing when I couldn't afford to live in Beverly Hills. And I think there are parts of the country where, in fact, there's senior living, even assisted living, that's pretty good in the South, in particular, that's fairly reasonably priced. So I'm going to sort of set the stage that maybe I see it very differently than you and met to the industry, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and your thinking on it.
Sure. I actually love talking about it from that standpoint. You hit on one point which I think is very relevant, and that is that there are regions in this country where you can develop at a cost that someone can, a middle income senior with middle income as defined ranges of resources can still move into an assisted living or senior environment in that context. But what the reality of many of our markets today is when you take a look at increasing supply, which we will need in the industry to service the boomer
Yeah.
generation. When you take a look at the cost of developing that new supply for the industry, the reality is that uh, the supply chain costs, the labor costs have all increased to a level where it's very difficult to develop and have capital return a yield at about 50% of the rents of full service senior housing today. It's
Yeah.
really hard, and it's not scalable in a way that we can serve a whole generation of middle income seniors. So so I believe there's two ways to make that happen. One is one that Merrill Gardens is executing today, which is goes by the brand name of Truewood. And what we have done in that equation is we lowered the cost of real estate by buying older buildings that were purpose built as senior housing, full service senior housing, and then doing two things. That took care of the difference. If I have to spend $350,000 a door, up to $450,000 a door, and in some markets higher to develop it, where I could buy an older building at 130, 140, even up to $180,000 a door, and my investment in capital in the physical plant was less, even if I put, which we have done in a number of situations, a pretty significant refurbishment package into the building that I acquired. So I've got some of the reduction in rent just by owning the real estate at a lower entry cost.
Right.
That's not enough, though, for most middle income seniors. So what we have also done is we have taken a step back. I believe a lot of us in the senior housing industry have a little bit of a blinder focus on that. It says that this is the way we do senior housing. This is what the residents are buying. Um, I think many of us are missing the fact that middle income seniors may choose to do more things for themselves, and as well that they can't afford the kind of staffing complements that we have in a full service senior housing operation. So if you look at total operating costs, you know, wages and benefits for some typical senior housing communities make up about 70% of the operating cost. If you take a look at the wages and benefits in a community, 50% of those typically are coming from two departments within the community: dining and care. And so there's not much you can do in today's staffing shortages with today's heavy dependence on agency, which should dissipate over time,
Yeah.
uh, to to not deal with the reality of having your operating costs increase at a rapid pace with workforce shortages and inflation now to drive wages. So what we did, and taking a look at it, was we looked at the benefits to a senior of living in a senior housing community. Certainly, dietary and care are two of the key elements that they receive. One of the most beneficial impacts they receive is reversal of uh, the risk and the causes of isolation that they suffer when they try to live at home on their own and are forced to
Yeah.
handle all of the components of senior living, whether it's activities, whether it's transportation, whether it's dietary, whether it's care. So, so what we did was we said, how about if we change how we do dietary? So many of us in the industry and many people across all careers have stayed in extended stay hotels where there is a very good, very simple, very healthy breakfast, depending on your choices, that's available to you. And so instead of having a Merrill dining model, which required two shifts in the kitchen of kitchen staff, which tend to be your more expensive staff in a dietary operation, we were able to cut that back to one shift in the kitchen and provide three good meals a day. But they were even better when you take a look at what the senior was, a typical senior is doing for dietary when they live at home in that context. The other aspect of it too is that I like to think of it somewhat as Back to the Future. And in that reference, what I really mean is if you go back, and I used to finance Bill Colson and Holiday before I joined the ranks of senior living operators. And Colson had a vision. Colson owned his own construction company, and he knew to the penny what it cost to build a building, and he built that same building everywhere. And so he had a lower real estate cost in the fixed plant. And then what he did was he said, okay, how can I staff this in an efficient way? And we all know, we all smile, we all shake our heads, but he would find a senior couple that would live in the building and, in effect, be the management direction of the building and be in the building 24 hours a day, approachable by any resident. So he was thinking how he can leverage the hours, lower the hours in serving the resident. Now, I also think, and I am very excited personally about serving middle income seniors in a different way. And what I mean by that is if you look at our penetration rates, we're 12 to 15% of U.S. seniors, use the industry. That means 85% try and stay at home, or alternatively, they move in with family. I think that the opportunity is to serve middle income in active adult, and what I mean by that is that my generation has different views as to what we want for rules and regulations when we move into a community. And some of those are dictated by the states with the regulated nature of the industry for care in that context. And so if you think about it, I believe we're going to have much higher penetration rates for my generation of seniors because not only will it be for those that can afford and actually want a full service environment, but also for those that want the benefits of community, an energized life without all the trappings of full service, and they will come in through active adult. Now, Colson would solve assisted living in an unlicensed building, which all of his buildings were. He would solve assisted living by working with home health. And if you think about it, a senior staying at home creates a care package for the same needs that one living in full service does out of the senior his or herself, out of family and adult children, out of home health care, and a combination of those uses. And Colson would have somebody in the building at night to basically the couple to be there for emergencies and also for monitoring change of condition of the senior. So when you think about middle income, I think middle income is going to be solved maybe by a less scalable model in terms of new build and new development, but by repurposing some of our older buildings, and also in a large part by having seniors, middle income seniors, and thrifty seniors, by the way, who can afford full service but don't want to pay the $6, 7, $8,000 a month that they have to for full service in the active adult segment, and that will prove to be a very sticky segment as seniors at an earlier age transition into active adult. They will either delay, in my opinion, or not even make the transition to full service over the next decade. And
Yeah, so I love this. I want to dig a little bit more into the staffing model and dining model and just the experience. But before we do that, I've got to run I shouldn't say got to. I get to run a short commercial from one of our sponsors that's just doing really cool stuff. Probably people you should be talking to, Bill, if I can say that. Great. You solve a little problem, but it's a little problem that happens a million times a day, which actually makes it into a big problem. And that's sort of how older people interact with the TV, and that the TV really is this great tool that gets suboptimal use, and you really crack this problem in a really amazing way. So why don't you just sort of give me 30 seconds for the audience about what Cavo does?
What Cavo is good at is all things TV. So communicating through the TV, content management through the TV, anything you'd want to overlay on your TV, messaging, that kind of stuff. So we're really, really good at all things TV.
So one of my favorite, they do amazing stuff with TV. You think about all the times that your staff member gets called to come and fix a TV problem, and basically they eliminate all that. So big fans. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to actually back up for a second. So one of the things that I'm really intrigued by in this low income model is the idea that it feels oftentimes like high-end senior living is built more to impress family members as they're making buy decisions, and that it probably is often above what the people who are really moving in want. And so I guess the question I sort of have is, how do we ultimately create great living experiences, which I think is kind of what you're talking about? And maybe even, I mean, if I can ask it this personally, what would make for you, and I think you and I are about the same age, what would make for you a great living experience in senior living?
Okay, so I think that's a very personal question that I am very happy to answer. So I've made up my mind, having spent 30 years, building Merrill Gardens, that my first stop in senior living is going to be active adult. And I'll tell you why. One is I envision a scenario where I can build and continue my desired activities much easier in active adult than I can in a Merrill Gardens community. Merrill Gardens by design is creating activities that appeal to and are appropriate to the whole community. And in active adult, I want to be able to find friends in the community that want to bike ride or want to hike, and want to fish. It's that kind of active activity that appeals to me, and then also to be able to travel and take classes. Now, all of that, you can argue, is available in full service senior housing. What's different is that in active adult, I can have all of that for about half the cost of what it takes to staff and operate a senior housing community that's fully licensed and dealing with seniors that are independent, assisted living, and memory care, and having to cross those elements. So I'm pretty thrifty. I can probably afford more. I don't need more, and yet that's where I'm going to start. Now, if I'm right, which I think I am, that since I would probably move in there 5 to 10 years before I would consider turning my life over to full service, um, I probably won't leave that. I will probably work around what I need in the way of care, the same way that all those seniors living with Bill Colson years and years ago worked around the same elements.
Yeah. 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 It's sort of a sobering thing. I'll tell you the other part that really strikes me, and this is, again, you say it's very personal, and this is the thing when I look at moving into senior living. Most of my life today is surrounded by people who are much younger than I am. In the industry, I tend to gravitate towards the relatively young kids who are thinking about things in different ways and talking about things that are a different way. I have a very interesting mix on my team of people like Jada, who's running things behind the scene and who's a brand new graduate. And I've got a couple of people who are writers who are in their 70s, and Jack Cumming, who's in his 80s. But if I only had to be with people who are old, that would be really, really difficult for me. And I know there's a lot of that that's regulatory. So do you have any thoughts about how we crack that problem?
Yeah, I think the way you crack the problem ultimately is where you locate buildings, and to facilitate that intergenerational comfort and exchange of ideas and energy. Um, I also think you crack the problem, frankly, by enabling seniors to pursue the things they love, and that's not always easy in a licensed regulated building as opposed to
Yeah.
an unlicensed building. So I'm still an advocate of what I believe the future for active adult will be. Um, and that doesn't say that there won't be a future for full service, because I think there will. But in the end, analysis, I think you, as an example, are going to wind up running a production studio in whatever senior housing community you choose.
That's right.
Just so
Yep.
you can be doing what you're doing and drawing people to you. And I think that choice has to be there in every senior living environment for those seniors that want to use those services. Now,
Yeah, I've often thought that somebody ought to build a senior living community that is co-located with a WeWorks co-sharing space where you could tap into. I mean, at today's senior living, right? These are people who were really successful to be able to get there to afford, and imagine being able to have people who can come in and do some coaching and mentoring, and maybe you get a little bit on the university campus, but I see on the university campus programs I've seen, it's more about the residents being able to go and suck from the university. So I want to shift gears here. We're sort of running on this. I feel terrible. This has like been the way fastest 30 minutes, but you have left Merrill Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have that right? And you're starting a new venture.
I am.
Can you tell me about it?
Sure. So I left banking after 18 years to pursue something I always wanted to do, which was build my own company. And so I spent 30 years building that company. And it's time for younger people to have a chance to step forward and run Merrill Gardens today. And Tana's doing a wonderful job. Tana Gall is doing a wonderful job doing that. But I'm not ready to sit and twiddle my thumbs. I'm not built or wired for retirement. And I got a piece of advice when I was younger, young professional in banking and a very successful leader in the bank. made a shift and came to a bank that I was working in that had some problems. And I asked him, I said, why would you leave, what you had built and with great success to come work where there are challenges here? And he told me something which I've never forgotten. And that is, if you want a rich career, one that you really are passionate about, repot yourself every 5 to 7 years. Take on a new challenge. And so I'm not very good with math, I guess. I spent 30 years at Merrill, but my new challenge is really working on giving back to the industry and operators in some ways through consulting and helping them solve problems that I have dealt with for 30 years, particularly fixing buildings, restoring value in buildings that have been impaired by COVID, and or navigating problems like staffing and operations. And I'm also going to raise a fund that I will use to acquire buildings that are value add, and I know that's possible. That's popular today. I guess the difference or the distinction for me is that I made a career out of value add buildings in Merrill, and there are a lot of things that I can either help through consulting or solve through acquisition. And I also think this is an extraordinary time for the next 2 to 5 years, where there will be market force driven sales in the market, and that will be not only of existing buildings and operations, but also, frankly, with some great development sites that are entitled, that when you look at the financial turmoil today, when you look at the pressure some banks are under, when you look at the cost of holding assets, where I believe I can buy some great development sites today and have them ready to break ground as the markets moderate and some normalcy comes back into what right now is a very crazy market. So between consulting with both operators, and I've also had some outreach from capital sources that are invested in current buildings and would like some independent eyes, experienced eyes to help them figure out with the operator how best to restore value. And I'm pretty excited about developing some new buildings for the market, and a good chunk of those will probably be in active adult, because that's what I believe is the most underserved segment of the market going forward.
Yeah, I when I look at active adult, I tend to agree with you. I just think that it ultimately gives me as a consumer the most flexibility. I get to pick and choose in terms of the levels of service. Don't have, as you talk about, not nearly as many restrictions in terms of you don't really have licensing restrictions you have to deal with. And so anyway, we are out of time. This has been a great conversation. I want to ask you if you were going to give a new leader, a young leader, one piece of advice, what would it be?
That would definitely be not to allow the current challenges in the industry to restrain your search for the opportunities. I believe there are going to be tremendous opportunities coming out of COVID, coming out of the staffing crisis, to serve seniors in an exciting way, in a very profitable manner, for capital that you can attract to expand your business. Too many leaders who run into, I think less experienced leaders who run into the kind of challenge that we got hit with 2.5 years ago, from that standpoint, get so consumed and worn down by dealing with the challenge that they sacrifice or don't think about looking for the opportunities coming out of this crisis. And demographics guarantee that the opportunity and the need for senior housing is not going to go away. In fact, it's going to increase. The more creative we are, the more the more flexible we make our service model, so that seniors can do exactly what you talked about, which is pick and choose what you want, rather than being told, here's the package and this is the price. And that's where full service senior housing is kind of stuck right now. They will find many opportunities to put more efficient staffing models into their buildings with the assistance of technology that can deal with flex staffing, that can help make the team members more efficient by taking on multiple roles within a building. So, I mean, I can go through staffing, I can go through the markets, I can even talk about the opportunities coming out of the building that all are exciting and energizing, and the good leaders are going to re-engage and focus on where the opportunities are, and not get consumed or wore down just by the challenges we've been in for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I love your optimism and positive view. I did an interview, I guess last week. We haven't published it yet, with an executive director in a building that is completely full, and he has no staffing challenges. And he's done it by just falling in love with his residents and his team members every day. And I just, I see that, and it's this amazing opportunity to change a lot of people's lives, not just the residents and their families, but the team members. And it's so exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And what you're talking about, I think, is how companies embrace and build a culture that is team and resident centric, and the rewards from doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
we're out of time. Thank you very much. Hang on for just a second after we close out. And I really appreciate your wisdom and your thoughts. And I guess I'll probably see you at a conference someplace soon. So,
well, you will, with my fancy laces too. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. I gave you flashing laces, and then I never saw you. But and I'm just going to say, I've got a bunch of conference. I'm going to bring some extra flashing laces if you're brave enough to join me.
Oh, I will. For sure.
I know you will. So that's for other people. Are you going? So anyway, I appreciate that. And with that, we're going to say goodbye.
Okay.